Hello makers, welcome to 3D Maker Noob. I'm Joe, and today we're going to talk about the Tronxy X3. Stick around. Welcome back makers. So a couple of weeks ago I received a Tronxy X3 from GearBest, which I was asked to do a build and review of. While this is not a full review just yet, I did put it together and have some initial thoughts, which I think it's best to share with you guys. But before we get on the thoughts, let's do a bit of a build time lapse, shall we? And that's that. So, a bit about the printer. The printer's frame is made of extruded aluminium and boasts a print volume of 220 by 220 by 300, which is slightly larger than your average build volume, and at a price point of around 175 euros, at least at this time of the recording, it makes it a very attractive purchase for those who want to get into 3D printing. The build volume in total took me just over 10 hours, and that's not including the time it took me to sort out all the nuts and screws as they were all jumbled up in a bag, and to take off the stickers from the acrylic sheets, which was a huge pain. Now, doing a live build of this printer was probably one of the best decisions I've made, and not because of any blue smoke that occurred, Jimmy, or lack thereof, but it was just a pain to put together. I have to say that as far as instructions go, they were okay, not the best of instructions, but good enough for you to know how to put it together. I did get a bit annoyed as the instructions tend to omit important information at the beginning of the instructions, which only come to light quite a few steps after they were relevant. Like, for example, the corner brackets of the aluminum. Some of them have notches on them in order to align with the indentation of the aluminum profile. However, a couple of them have shaved off notches on the side, so these can lie flat when you install them at a different angle. But it only tells you about these specific corners and why they're grinded down after you have pretty much installed all of them and need the last two for the bed brace rail. These corner brackets also have a tendency to have enlarged holes, so if you try to put in a screw, it just goes all the way through. And you do need washers for them, which obviously are not provided. Other than that, it was a fairly straightforward build. But I need to point out that you do have extra screws and nuts of certain sizes. But you do have exactly the right amount of screws of certain types, so you have to make sure you do not lose any. Now for the biggest pain, the axe carriage. The amount of pieces that you need to put together for the axe carriages is insane. The margin of error resulting in a bag of swear words is, it's extremely high, not to mention that positioning of the non-adjustable rollers is completely off. This leaves a huge margin of error due to a huge amount of play between each of the three rollers, which are these here and these over here. Now, take all those factors together, include the number of nuts and bolts needed to put the x-axis together, and the fact that the x-axis is comprised of acrylic parts, alumina parts, and also 3D printed parts, and you will end up close to just giving up, making this a very complicated and, to be honest, annoying build. After having spent the best part of another 2 to 3 hours trying to align everything on this printer by undoing all the bolts and then tightening them again slightly as I moved the carriages up and down to see how much wobble was left, I did manage to get it moving properly. Any final adjustments to the lead screws, wobble at least that there was done by loosening the lead screw nut that holds the lead screw in place and find the right position for the least amount of wobble with the lead screws. Then sort of gently tightening them as I move the Z-axis up. Next came the wiring. Cable management in this printer is pretty much non-existent. You have wires running in every direction due to the positioning of the extruder. You have the extruder on this side, which is fixed to the x-axis carriage, and you have cables running from one side to the other, and then you have this sort of hanging here and cables running everywhere. Needless to say, making this thing look neat is, well, it will be one hell of a task if I do manage. However, having done all that, eventually, the printer, as you can see, was in fact built and it prints. Took a while to get printing, but it prints nonetheless. So what I did was, I started off by printing a couple of calibration cubes with some extrude PLA that I had at hand. It printed okay. I saw that it was, well, acceptable. I tightened a few more nuts and bolts that were around the x-axis and the aluminum rods and the bed frame. It wasn't perfectly level, but I did make sure that the x-axis was as perfectly or as humanly possible to make it level towards the bed. So I decided to throw in some Filamentum Vertigo Gray PLA. I also need to point out one very important thing about this printer. It does not have a part cooling fan. The only fan available is the extruder fan or the hot end fan right here, which is a bit overpowered and gives the printer a tendency to drop temperatures quite often or not reach higher temperatures at all. The hot end itself is actually quite small, which is probably why it has such an impact. However, as with every printer, I still wanted to print a benchy. So after I threw in the Filamentum Vertigo Gray, I started printing. The results was this benchy right here. I have absolutely no idea how is it possible for this printer to produce such a gorgeous benchy. I truly have no idea. While it is not perfect, it is definitely one of the nicest benchies I have printed. There was no stringing, the overhangs were spot on, and so is the bridging. The chimney is not perfect, but it's probably one of the best chimneys I've seen printed on a benchy from all the printers I have. Once again, I have no idea how it managed to print this, especially without a part cooling fan. The only reasoning I can find is that the exit point at the bottom of the hot end carriage, just right here, is quite open. So most likely the fan that cools down the hot end is actually strong enough to cool down the PLA that is being extruded. It's the only explanation I got to. Once that was done, I wanted to print something larger. So I went on Thingiverse and I downloaded one of the vases that there are. I sliced it in Simplify 3D. And I need to point out that I'm using more Simplify 3D. The main reason being that is Cura keeps crashing on my PC, so I'm going to need to sort that out. But at the moment, I do not feel like doing a clean install of Windows. Anyways, I threw it in Simplify 3D and I started printing. It was going absolutely perfect until the Bowden connector on the extruder decided to unscrew itself due to the fact that it wasn't tight enough, completely my fault. And with the movement of the x-axis going back and forth, it kind of just undid itself. What happened then was that it summoned the unextruded spaghetti monster. That was definitely not fun to see, and it was definitely not fun to spool back probably about 30 meters of filament. However, the results prior to that incident were pretty much awesome, actually. It was coming out really nice, so it was a shame that it was a waste. However, I could see potential, so I decided, you know what, I don't like to give up, so we'll try it once again. I reattached the Bowden connector, and I started printing again. This time I did it in a smaller scale because, first of all, I wasn't sure I had enough filament, and also because I wanted to print something that would only take a few hours because I actually needed to record this episode. Now, at that point, I didn't realize that the Z-axis had lost alignment completely, and after a few minutes of printing, the misalignment was completely evident in the print, which I obviously had to stop. The print started out fine. However, at some point it resulted in one of the Z steppers to kind of lock or lose alignment. The motor got stuck, and therefore it started increasing the Z-axis on one side but kind of slowing down on the other, and it printed at an angle, and it kind of did a spectacular fail here. But once again, I don't like to give up. I always persist. I realigned everything, and the x-axis was fine again. I measured everything, it was perfect, and I restarted the print once again. An almost flawless print, and the beautiful result can actually be seen quite clearly. The one thing I've noticed while printing is that prints themselves are a bit oval, meaning that the printer definitely needs further calibration, which will be a pain and will most likely not be entirely possible unless I spend a lot of time tinkering or upgrading parts, which I'm kind of dreading, but I will do anyway. So what are my initial thoughts on this printer? It's definitely not a printer I could ever recommend to someone who is just starting out and wants this as a first ever printer. You know me, I get excited pretty much about any printer that enters this office, no matter the cost or make. I even was excited about the 101 Hero when it got here. However, this printer was just too frustrating. It frustrated the hell out of me and I was literally on the verge of putting it to the side for a very long time and just calm myself and get to it in a couple of weeks. Apart from all the things I've mentioned, there are other factors which come into play, like the annoying animation on the screen menu, which just takes forever and is, well, once again, annoying. The sometimes unresponsive buttons for the said menu. The Melzi clone that it comes with is basically just that. It's a clone, which all the Tronxy or Tronxy X3 use. A clone is always a clone, and therefore always needs to be treated with a touch of precaution when it comes to safety. Having said that, the printer quality is actually, well, it's impressive. For the amount of play that the printer has, in every single axis. I mean, the ideal scenario would be to reprint the X carriages in a more solid format where the rollers could be adjustable, maybe create some reinforcement for the bed frame to remove wobble, install a couple of MOSFETs just for extra safety, and also for just for the heck of it, you know, just install or print a fan shroud for a part cooling fan. As the Melzi board does actually have an input for the external part cooling fan. Once all those are done, then I am quite positive this would be a very pleasant printer to have and definitely more reliable. However, as it is, out of the box, is just too much of a pain to put together, to be completely honest. I mean, I always like to find the good things in every 3D printer, no matter what it is. And this does have good things, and that can be seen in the print quality, which is absolutely great. And that quality is with out of the box flaws. So I also believe, as I said, it has great potential, but the question is at what cost? I will still do the free upgrades that I can find to download, and I will make sure to print all these parts with the printer itself. I will install a heatbed MOSFET just for my peace of mind, and I will also make sure that I share everything with you guys and let you know my final thoughts. But only then will I give you my final review of this printer. That is it for me, guys. I hope you enjoyed this episode on my initial thoughts of the Tronxy X3. If you want more details and specs on the printer, I will leave a link in the video description below. As always, please leave a comment, share, more importantly, subscribe and like if you enjoyed the video. If not, let me know why. I'll take constructive criticism every day of the week. In the meantime, as always, guys, happy making.